There's a lot to love about video games, but new releases always have something you don't necessarily want. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 things players hated in the first half of 2023. Starting off with number 10, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom's Koroks. It's hard not to get a little resentful of these guys after a while. You have to find them in order to upgrade your storage limits, but rather than helping you out, they kind of actively impede your progress by hide from you and force you to do annoying challenges. There was little that could be done about them in Breath of the Wild, and, well, we were forced to just silently suffer their nonsense, but no more in Tears of the Kingdom. Now these little freaks need your help, but all they'll get in return is suffering. Now that there's actually one of these guys physically in the game world, it's time for a little payback. With the Ultra Hand, your instruments of torture are nearly limitless. And people have gone nuts coming up with novel and elaborate ways to dole out a little payback on these guys. Most of the quote-unquote hate for Koroks is all in good fun. It's just people screwing around or just doing something silly, you know? But for the amount of violence players have perpetrated on the Koroks, you'd think they were someone's worst enemy. At number 9, in Star Wars Jedi Survivor, the performance issues. Switching over to a real thing people are actually legitimately really fed up with. It's PC performance issues. It feels like pretty much every major PC port in the last year has some kind of glaring issues. Like, it's not necessarily the case, there have been some good ones, but the vast majority of PC ports in 2023 haven't just been bad, they've been terrible. Like, we made a video about it that kind of makes it make a little bit more sense, but that doesn't mean it's any less frustrating or that people hate it any less. Jedi Survivor, great game, but the PC performance leaves a lot to be desired. There's constant stuttering, slowdown, graphical bugs, odd glitches. The list really just goes on and on. It's not unplayable, depending on who you ask, but it's not nearly good enough. In this game's case, console performance wasn't amazing either, but it was so much better than the PC at least. What makes it especially frustrating is that the game isn't incredibly ambitious or anything. Its open world is pretty small in comparison to other games, and it's relatively segmented. There's just consistent stuttering and slowdown when entering new areas or just moving too quickly when you load a game. The game used to crash if you moved too fast in certain areas, and this is with an SSD, which is just something that shouldn't be happening anymore. Jedi Survivor is hardly the only game with PC performance issues in 2023, but it's sort of emblematic of the entire problem. Like, publishers just keep cheating on their ports, and PC players are getting really tired of it. And number 8 is Street Fighter 6's Battle Pass. At first blush, the Street Fighter 6 Battle Pass might not seem that bad. It's only $5, and that makes it one of the cheaper Battle Passes out there, and it only has custom character cosmetics and other relatively minor rewards rather than major pieces of new content like new stages, fighters, or costumes. You can even earn your fight money back if you complete it, so as far as these things go, it's actually one of the more generous Battle Passes, technically speaking, out there. Fight game fans are still not happy about it for a couple of reasons. The big one is Street Fighter 6 is still a full-priced game, and the people buying it either aren't accustomed to or just flat out don't want battle passes in the game, period. The other is the most common complaint with battle passes. The content's time limited, so if there is something you want and you miss the time limit, you're just out of luck. You don't get that costume piece. If it were a free-to-play game, I think people would probably be a little more understanding, but at full retail price, the extra nickel and diming feels pretty unnecessary. Now, let me be clear here, Street Fighter 6 is not a game lacking in content, especially for a fighting game. Nobody's complaining this game is bad, but people are complaining the Battle Pass is at best unnecessary and at worst blatantly greedy. Battle passes are just a fact of life though in online games. That doesn't mean people aren't going to hate them, and it's unlikely they'll change their minds at this point either. At number 7 is how little of an RPG Final Fantasy XVI actually is. Now, Final Fantasy has always been about spectacle. Even in the NES games, they were trying to throw pretty big swing twists and set-piece movements that were, in retrospect, pretty ahead of their time. And the series has really gotten crazier and more wild with how flashy it's gotten as time's gone on. For many people, Final Fantasy is a name synonymous with RPG, though. It's the first RPG they've ever played. It has formative memories memories associated with it from a lot of people. So when a new Final Fantasy comes out, it has one playable character, no turn-based battles, and in every respect, basically just a really long action game. Some people aren't going to be super happy. Some people might even hate it, and that's no bearing on the actual quality of the game. I was kind of skeptical of it for this exact reason, and I ended up really liking it. As an action game, Final Fantasy XVI is excellent in most respects, but it's just not much of an RPG. There's an article out there about how God of War Ragnarok is more of an RPG than Final Fantasy XVI is, and I can't really disagree with their assessment. Ragnarok does have more traditional RPG elements in it than Final Fantasy XVI does. That doesn't mean Final Fantasy XVI is bad, it's just that it's not what some people want or expect, especially when you're talking about a long-running franchise. Like, that can make emotions run pretty hot with people. There's built-in expectations there, and if they're not met, fans can get kind of angry. I'm not saying the people who hate the game are wrong here either. It's fair to want and expect a more traditional Final Fantasy game. It's just not something that personally bothers me. I'm actually really enjoying the game, and I'm about as traditional an RPG fan as one can be, but I'm also about as big of a Platinum Games fan as one can be, and they had a hand in it, and it shows. Number 6 is Forspoken, the embarrassing dialogue. Yeah, there's a lot not to like about Forspoken. It's got a barren and bland open world. It's incredibly slow in terms of rollout of abilities. The tutorials go on forever. But the one thing the internet's really latched on as a point of hate back when it came out, it's the writing. It's just not good. People like to complain about Marvel movie dialogue, and if you're one of those people, you know what we're talking about here. This kind of back and forth jokey writing that appears in a lot of these movies. There is an art to that kind of writing, and it can be done well, and that's not to say that Marvel movies all do it well, but this isn't about Marvel movies, it's about Forspoken, and oof, wow, did they not do it well. Some of the writing in Forspoken almost feels like a parody of that kind of thing. It almost feels intentionally bad. It's just so overwritten and desperate. Like, it's almost hard to describe, but you know exactly what I'm talking about when you see it. The voice actors, are they trying? But the writing is what fails them, not the other way around. The worst of it is really front-loaded with all the lame fish-out-of-water humor that you'd expect from a mid-90s kids movie. When she says, "I just moved shit with my mind," not just once, but 3 times in a row, that's when you know the quality's locked in for the duration.
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
I just moved shit with my mind.
Perhaps our connection has somehow awoken some abilities.
I just moved shit with my mind.
I just keep hearing I.
I just moved shit with my freaking mind! Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts. You know what? I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
Your only hope is a high tolerance for cringe if you're going to get through this one, and I don't know if you played Forspoken. It's a lot of great ideas that are executed in a manner where cringe dialogue is definitely not something that seems worth it, but that's also up to taste. And number 5 is Hogwarts Legacy boring open world. Hogwarts Legacy got a lot of praise for its immersive version of the Wizarding World, but if there's one universal complaint about the game, it's the open world. I'm not talking about the actual school here, but rather everything else. The world of Harry Potter is pretty unique, and if it was created accurately, it wouldn't easily slot into the expected open world formula. If the developers were a little more creative, they might have taken that opportunity to really play into the IP and make something unique in terms of the open world space, but instead they just kind of jammed a bunch of inspired open world game conventions in and called it a day.
Revelio.
I think a lot of people wanted a game that would recreate the Hogwarts experience, but instead, it's kind of an action-adventure game with a Harry Potter theme slapped on top. The actual school looks really great, but there's not a lot actually done in terms of really being about Harry Potter, other than having a lot of collectibles. And the outside's equally as impressive looking, but it's filled with your standard cut-and-paste puzzles and bandit camps, and you clear it out like any other open-world game. Not necessarily bad. Actually, it's probably a pretty good example of it, but it's also not very inspiring. for people who are really into the Harry Potter series. People thought it was actually pretty disappointing. And a lot of fans, they wanted something closer to Bully from Rockstar, but that was not what we got at all. Maybe at some point I will be forgiven for saying it just looks like any other open world game with a Harry Potter theme on top back when it came out, because that seems to be a pretty consensus opinion now. But, you know, it's funny too, because I don't actually hate the game. And number 4 is Wolong Fallen Dynasty's endless loot. Team Ninja really has a loot problem. All their games really have too much of it. From Neo to Stranger in Paradise to Wolong, for some reason they just keep showering players with a deluge of mostly useless loot that you kind of have to tediously sort through in order to sell. Clearly at this point they consider the loot a key part of their games. Like, this is what they want their games to be, because they keep doing it regardless of what people say about it. And I'm sure that there's people that like it. It's not everybody, or close to everybody. Like, players don't have to like it in order to like the games, especially. It'd be less of a problem if it were a satisfying trickle of loot, but that's just not what this is. The drops are non-stop, and most of it's junk, all destined for the trash pile. If you could easily sort it in bulk sell, maybe that wouldn't be as much of a problem, but at least at release it sure wasn't. Even a feature as basic as the ability to compare two pieces of equipment was not there at launch. Sorting through inventory just felt like the most tedious possible busy work, especially because builds don't really matter until post-game, so it was all kind of just wasted time, and it's an action game. You want to be fighting enemies, beating bosses, not slowly scrolling through endless inventory trying to clear out space just so you can do it again in maybe an hour or two. And number 3 is Diablo 4, the always online requirement. By most accounts, Diablo 4 is a pretty good return to form for Blizzard, but there's one aspect of the game that's really disliked by players, and it's that you have to be online at all times. For most people, Diablo is a single-player experience, and the small amount of online features added to the game don't really affect the experience a whole lot, and a lot of people just don't care about them at all. For most people, the amount of interactions you'll have with other players might as well be non-existent too. Sometimes you'll see someone running around in the background while you're playing. Sometimes you'll get help with a world event, and that's about it. In most cases, the online stuff isn't bad, and the game had a pretty relatively stable launch, so there's a lot of good stuff going on, but why the always online requirement? It seems completely unnecessary. I'm not playing with someone else, so why do I have to wait for a queue to play the game? The always online is especially bad for people playing on hardcore, which is a permadeath mode. The very first player who managed to get level 100 ended up losing their character due to a disconnect, which, wow, that had to be so frustrating. And just recently, the game suffered a denial of service attack that left most players unable to play the game for hours. Even though people owned the game, it was installed on their hard drive. The vast majority of players could not play, despite the fact that they aren't using any online features at all. When always online games are working, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, but when they don't, it's a big problem, especially for a single player game. Like, I get that you hate piracy, guys. I understand it. You gotta make your money, but this is the most annoying way you can do it. And number 2 is Blood Bowl 3's terrible microtransactions. This game just barely squeaked out of being on the most disappointing games of 2023, but that doesn't mean it's going to get spared here. At release, Blood Bowl 3 was lambasted as a bare bones and buggy disappointment that's worse than the previous games in pretty much every way. There's fewer teams, the rules changes feel minor, the UI's a mess, and somehow the game got uglier than the previous entry, even though it's reusing a ton of assets from that game. I mean, there's a lot to hate about this one, but it's utterly shameless microtransactions are really a standout. They are especially bad. One of the major selling points about the game was that the teams were much more customizable this time around, and yeah, that's technically true, but they forgot to tell people that you had to pay for it. In one of the most ridiculous microtransaction schemes I've ever seen, buying a cosmetic doesn't unlock it for every guy on your team. You only get one costume piece with each transaction, so if you want to give another team member the same cosmetic, you gotta buy it again. So every team member has to be customized separately from one another, and you gotta pay up every single time. Most of the cosmetics are barely worth the price anyway. In any other game, this stuff would all be free, but here you're not just paying for it, you're paying a premium. Like, keep in mind with a full team, that's 16 separate transactions, and that's one team. Currency can be earned in-game, but it's not generous at all. You only get it by ranking up in a battle pass, and of course, the free one is stingier than the premium one, so it's either an endless grind to unlock a few customization options, or you're back to square one and just paying up. And finally, at number 1, The Lord of the Rings Gollum. Everyone hates Gollum. If there's one thing everyone agrees on first half of 2023, it's that nobody likes Gollum. This guy's already the punching bag of the Lord of the Rings franchise, but somehow they found a way to make him sink even lower with the frankly pathetic Lord of the Rings Gollum game. Character is great, Andy Serkis, legend, but he's got nothing to do with this game, and it sucks so bad. Immediately hailed as the worst game of the year and one of the worst games of all time, Gollum really can't catch a break. And yeah, this game is not the worst game ever. It's very harsh to say that. At very least, it's playable. So yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not bad. It's extremely bad. In this day and age, deeply mediocre is almost worse than spectacularly bad. If Gollum was some hilarious masterpiece of incompetence, it would probably be funnier and therefore better on some level. But the actual game is just sad. The gameplay's basic, to say the least. It's pretty brain dead. The story's pretty flatline. The performance is a mess. Graphics are ugly, especially for Gollum, who looks so much worse than even the one from Shadow of Mordor, which is a 9-year-old game. This Gollum is just so hateable, from his stupid face to the embarrassing choices that never amount to anything. This game is all around just boring and pretty miserable. When the best thing you can say about a game is that it functions, and not always well, might I add, but it functions, you've got a big problem.
She called me fall. That's us.
Gollum is one of the most iconic characters of all time, but I don't really know who was asking for a game about him. For all the hate Jar Jar Binks gets, he would probably lend himself to a better game than this. It doesn't mean that somebody who actually took on a Jar Jar Binks game could make the game that worked for that character. I have a feeling that would require a very strange set of priorities. And that in mind, it's also a bad idea. But nobody wants a Gollum game. Like, why? And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.